Hello, and welcome to My Counselor Live. My name is Brittany East, and this week's topic is applicable to absolutely everyone. It's about breathing. Before we dive into this unexpectedly deep topic, though, I'd love to introduce our featured counselor this week. Paul Stephenson joins us from Texas and is eager to share what started the spark into an understanding about breathing. Paul, before we go into your topic, though, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself for those viewers who may not know you yet?
Sure. Yeah, I'm here in San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo and the San Antonio Spurs. So been a lifelong resident of Texas, born and raised here. Love the state, and oddly enough, I love the hot weather. So,
That's good. I think it's fun. I feel like a lot of people from Texas love Texas, like that, like they're never going to go anywhere else. That's like their home. So that's awesome. Well, your article today is titled, "Let's Get Curious About Breathing and Anxiety." So what inspired you to write this article?
I have a lot of clients that just present with anxiety, and there are a number of other things going on in their lives, but anxiety tends to be one of those common things that most of my clients are wrestling with on some level. So, and this, just to be candid, this is my first opportunity to share with the MyCounselor.Online community. And so it just seemed to fit. Hey, this is something everyone wrestles with. So I figured I'd start with something pretty basic.
Yeah, and I think this is great. I mean, I've definitely struggled with anxiety. I felt like your article, we'll get into it, but had some great tidbits even for me. So when you wrote this, though, did you have a specific audience in mind that you were hoping that this would reach, or do you think everyone can benefit from this?
I do think everyone can benefit on some level, right? There are going to be some people who are more familiar with breathing techniques and whatnot. So this probably isn't applicable to those folks. I mean, if you've been doing yoga your whole life, then yeah, this probably isn't going to apply. But for most folks, we really tend to not think about our breathing, and certainly how we're aware that when we get anxious or nervous or angry or whatever that hot emotion is, we notice that our breathing increases. But rarely do we take the initiative to think backwards, in a sense, that when we experience those hot emotions, we can calm ourselves through our breathing. That's not as intuitive. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I can attest to that. I feel like for a long time, I've been told to do more yoga to deal with a lot of breathing and stuff. And so, yeah, this was really great, diving into it. And in your article, you talk about the effect that breathing has, literally how it can change your anxiety. So what practical tips can you give to someone who wants to incorporate breathing to help reduce their anxiety?
Yeah, probably the most practical thing is to practice. Practice when you are calm and you don't have anything else on your plate. A lot of times when folks present, I'll encourage them to pick 3 times during the day to sit down and be very intentional about practicing. And the idea, very simply, I have a military background. We do a lot of training in the military. And the reason is so that when the emotions are present, when everything is going bad around us, we don't have to think about it, right? Because we've already practiced it over and over and over again. And that's the idea. Practice it when you're calm and when you can think through, oh, that didn't really work. So that when emotionally those emotions are hot, you don't have to think about it. It's something that you've practiced so frequently, it just, oh, that's right. Here we go. Let's step into that breath work. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really love that explanation. I feel like sometimes you can feel I feel like I'm just breathing. This is dumb. Is it really helping or changing anything? But I think you're right. It's supposed to be like that second nature. That's a really great analogy. In the military, they're doing all these things that may or may not happen, but it's so that when that happens, you're ready. You don't have to think about the next step. Your body will just take over. I know in your article, you mentioned 4 different changes to do your breathing. Do you mind kind of going through those 4 different ones?
Yeah. First one is just slowing your breathing. And I've already referenced that a little bit, but very simply, the idea is that our body works in reverse sometimes. In other words, if I am anxious, my just kind of stepping into and slowing my breathing will help me relax and calm. So slowing your breathing, being intentional about that. And you asked the four: slowing, sighing, speaking, and singing. So the sighing is a way to reset our breath rate. And it's very simply being intentional about just taking that sigh. It really does kind of reset things physiologically in our bodies. And I would just encourage you, I think I made a clever reference. Make sure you let your loved ones know around you that what you're doing, because that can communicate something you don't intend, right? The third one is speaking. So I love the voiceover artists with that really deep and resonant voice, and right, and but find somebody that really helps you to relax, or on the one hand. On the other hand, practice your own speaking so that you can tap into that calmness in your own voice, and you can hear that anxiety. And as you slow your speaking, as you lower your tempo, you can feel yourself calming down. So there's an affirming component to that as well. And then finally is singing. And there's a lot going on there. But as believers, as Christians, understanding that singing is a primary component to worship. I think that's the spiritual component, but just the way that God designed us. He designed us in such a way that when we change the rhythm of our voice, the rhythm of our breathing, he wired us in such a way that helps to balance our emotional state. So those are the four.
Yeah, that was great. Actually, yeah. So a couple of things. Like one, I actually have started something one of my counselors is having me do is something called like radical acceptance, where I speak out loud, like what's going on around me when I'm feeling really anxious. And it's funny because I didn't think about it, but when I read your article and it was like speaking, and I was like, oh, it's so true. Because as I'm speaking, I'm realizing I'm having to like slow down how I'm talking. I'm listening to my own voice, which my husband says puts him to, like, in a nice way, puts him to sleep at night when I'm talking. So I'm like, okay, like, I guess that is one of those things that actually, whether or not I didn't realize that though, but I think speaking out loud, my brain is maybe recognizing like, oh, okay, like we can calm down. Like, so I thought that was really neat. And the second thing, which I don't know if we mentioned at the beginning, but the unique thing about breathing, which you pointed out, is that it's both voluntary and involuntary. Like, what is that? I mean, like, is there any other parts of the body that are like that, or why do you think our lungs are like that?
That's a great question. And there's a lot in that quite honestly, I'm still researching and trying to in my own way, kind of discover, God, what did you have? What's your purpose here? Why is this so unique in our bodies? That we can affect, like heart rate, we can affect our heart rate on some level, but it is, it's not an easy thing to do. And it takes a lot of very deliberate practice in order to do so. But breath rate, it's as simple as any child who is mindful of it can change their breath rate. Yeah. So, I'm not sure I answered your question, but no, it is unique in our physiology, and there's something fascinating about it. And I think the way that it is tied to our emotional state, that it's intriguing. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like it was intriguing, and just even realizing that it's one of the only body parts that you're right, like we can breathe. That's involuntary, and then kind of like all these techniques are all the voluntary techniques to like change our emotional state. So there's so much to go into this. I'm so excited that you've like even brought up this topic to dive into. Like, I'm pumped for it. But what final piece of advice would you give to people who are watching this and they're like just really wanting to like figure this out?
Yeah. This is a little bit of an off topic, but another thing that I bring into play when I'm talking about calming and anxiety is the idea of a calm place. So utilizing and visualizing that calm place in conjunction with your voice. And whether that is making your own voice tape, describing walking into that calm place. If I could show you my painting in my office, it's a cowboy up in the mountains. I love backpacking. I love being in the mountains, and the rain is coming down and dripping off of his cowboy hat. And I just visualize myself walking in that place, and I engage all five senses. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I taste? What do I smell? And then what do I feel? And as I do that, you really engage that creative aspect of your mind. And it, in a very real sense, it captures your mind and takes it away from that thing that may be anxiety provoking. But one of the best ways to do that is couple that with voice, with speaking. So kind of talk your way through it. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
But
I think you're really passionate about this topic and excited to go deeper with other topics. But although we love this, into our trending topic, these are topics that it's kind of blowing up the internet and people want to know more about. And I'm glad that we have a licensed counselor to share some wisdom about it. So our topic this week is about boundaries. So what are boundaries in relationships? Like, what's a broad definition of that?
Yeah, a broad definition would be, where is that difference between myself and other?
Oh, okay.
Right. So where do I stop and the other starts? Now, in a physical sense, that makes a lot of sense. But emotionally, that doesn't, it gets blurred sometimes. And that's where working on boundaries and being intentional about that can be really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, I really liked that very much visual, one starts, the other person starts. So how do you know, like, say you have a relationship, maybe you feel like it's kind of hazy. How do you know if you need more boundaries in your relationships then?
Yeah, one of the primary places that I run across boundaries being an issue is when I feel like somebody else is making decisions for me, in a sense. So there's not a clear difference between who I am and what I want, or a lot of times the statement, I don't really know what I want. That's an indicator that's where I would get curious and I wonder why that is. Is someone making decisions for you? Are you just kind of defaulting to that? That's a place where boundaries can be helpful, and not that you need to push back against someone speaking into your life necessarily, but it's important to be mindful that God created you to make decisions and to be responsible for and be a steward, in a sense, of the skills and the life that He's given you. So
yeah, that's really helpful. So like, say you're in a relationship and you realized, okay, I don't know who I am anymore in this, or I feel like I can't speak up. Like, how do you even start setting boundaries in relationships?
Yeah. A lot of times, well, I'm a counselor.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. Sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else kind of help you think that through. When you're in the midst of it, a lot of times it's hard to discern the difference between other and self. We get it's almost like when you're in the fog of war, and when you're in the muddiness of relationships, sometimes it's hard to really be able to see and make some of those differentiations. So sometimes having a trusted, wise, and not necessarily a professional counselor, but someone that you respect, and you respect their wisdom. Hey, this is what's going on. What do you think about this? It can be helpful. So.
Do you feel like lack of boundaries can happen in any relationship, or do you feel like it's more likely to happen in certain types of relationships?
It can happen in any relationship, certainly. I'm not prone to go to absolute statements, and I just did. But yeah, I may come back and add a disclaimer at some later time. But yeah, it's pretty universal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know that we're all kind of in this together, and it's
like
a normal struggle type thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So is it possible to, like, so say you're starting to set boundaries, is it possible to set too many boundaries, or how can you even tell if you're not setting too many boundaries?
Thoughts on when you might be setting too many boundaries? In one sense, when you find yourself being isolated from those you care about. When you find yourself longing for connection, and that connection is not happening. That's certainly not an absolute statement, but that's an indication that, hey, maybe I'm making choices that are limiting my exposure and my vulnerability to other people. And that could be one of the things that's going on, is I'm trying to protect myself too much, right? Which is it's a reasonable conclusion to come to, but it's also counterproductive to community and connection, which is part of how God designed us. So.
No, that's really helpful to know, kind of like that idea of, like, that kind of finding that good middle ground with boundaries, and the idea that it's a journey to kind of find that middle ground, and probably having someone that's helpful to see into our lives, whether we're not having enough or we're having too many, seems to be kind of like that common core, though, that just someone who's like you said, doesn't have to be a counselor, but you trust, like, they're going to be able to be honest, but not harsh.
Sure.
Is what it sounds like. So thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think something I've had to grow in with different relationships, and I appreciate that. We want to have like a Christian perspective on it as well. It's to, we do want to foster community, want to foster relationships. We're built for that. We also like want to be our own person. Like, God designed us each like individually for a reason, and like diving into that, I think, was really
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Yeah. So our final segment of the show is our viewer Q&A. These are all questions that have been submitted by actual viewers, and an actual counselor gets to answer them. So anyone who's watching this, you can always go to MyCounselor.Online/ask and submit any question. We always keep them anonymous so that, although we will be speaking to you, no one knows that you've asked this question. So, Paul, the first question we have today says, I'm a pastor and I'm feeling extremely burnt out after the past year and a half. What should I do?
Yeah. Burnout is all too real, especially in the pastorate. And with all the tension in our world right now, and especially on the heels of COVID, all the isolation and the shift in culture, I really feel for pastors right now. Adds a significant burden. As I think about how to manage that on a personal level, and one, being mindful of your sense of margin, making sure that you're maintaining appropriate margin and adequate margin. A lot of times we get stretched, and sometimes we need to increase our margin. And what I mean in terms of margin is just that balance of life, not pushing, not allowing your edges to be trimmed so small that you don't have anything left over to give when something comes up. I would encourage folks also, I would encourage you in that moment and that season of burnout, to find that trusted sounding board. One of the hardest things for pastors is they get so isolated, and there's nobody that you can bounce ideas off of, express hurt and heartache. You feel like you have to be the strong solid one for the whole congregation, but that oftentimes leaves you as a human being. You're still human. You still have hurts, and you still have um, uh, those moments that you really need somebody else that you can lean on. So find those opportunities to reach out to and find that trusted advocate, that trusted sounding board again, that you can speak to and who can speak into your life. Those are really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like sometimes we can forget that our pastors are human, that they, although they were called to this vocation or chose this vocation, that they're still also just trying to do their best and,
Yes.
Are capable of intense feelings and hurt and just trying to manage all of that. Do you feel like, as a counselor in your practice, do you feel like you've seen a rise in pastors seeking out help, or do you feel like that's also just a difficulty of being in the pastoral work of just kind of seeking more help for burnout and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the risks associated with pastoral role. I mean, that's one of the challenges of being a pastor, that fishbowl kind of lifestyle in which you feel like you always have to be on. And yeah, burnout is very real in the pastorate. So, yeah.
Amen. Well, our next question says a little bit different, but it says, as a parent, how can I explain to my kids all of the events happening around the world today in a way that informs them, but doesn't traumatize them?
Yeah. As a parent myself, and as a human being walking through some of this season of our country, our world, there's some difficult issues that we're wrestling with. Probably the most important thing is communicating and setting as the backdrop for everything, recognizing the sovereignty of God. And speaking that into the lives of your children as you're communicating. We are going to go through hard things, but we are never beyond God's reach. In fact, we're never out of His hands. So, and He walks with us through those seasons, hard as they may be, right? But we are always cared for. So, really emphasizing the sovereignty of God in all things. It's huge. So, and from there, also recognizing your own humanity, your own limitations, and making sure that your kids recognize. And I would encourage you to make sure that you communicate, I'm sorry, forgive, and ask for forgiveness if you make a mistake, or if you lose your patience, or you find yourself overwhelmed in a moment associated with current events. Let your children see repentance in you, so that they can follow that model as well. And that's so encouraging to a child, a young man or woman, to see someone whom they respect and honor really recognize their own limitations and trust in the sovereignty of God as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Also, having young kids myself, just the idea, that God is in control. Do you feel like, though, there is a specific filter to keep in mind, depending on the age of the kid, how much to share, or how to share that? Or do you feel like it just depends on the child's maturity, or what do you think kind of influences what, actually, okay, we're watching the news together, when do I shut it off, or when do I decide I'm just going to share the news? Do you feel like there is a way to do that in a way, or there's a specific way to do that, or is it just kind of we're all learning together?
Yeah, there's definitely an aspect in which we're all learning together. and every child is unique, right? I mean, there's not even a line that you can draw there in terms of age, because some children are going to be more mature and able to deal with things. But yeah, I'm not sure that I have a good line to draw there. Trust your own relationship with your child, right? Trust that, and be intentional about facilitating and developing that relationship in such a way that when you need to make those hard choices, and honey, we're going to turn this off and we'll talk about this. Let's talk about this offline, or yeah, it's not always that simple, right? I wish that it were, but yeah, recognizing that those breaches in relationship they're going to happen. So, and being intentional about making time to facilitate that connection with your kids, so that you become that filter in a sense for them, as you learn to, or as they learn how to engage a very tumultuous world at times. So
yeah, I know, I really appreciate that, because I feel like sometimes we can get so caught up like, well, this event's okay, this, like, how do I'm going to focus on the actual event versus like the overarching theme is like, okay, trusting God, but also like kind of what you talked about, like, okay, my focus is not researching this event, what's good information, but did I invest in my child, our relationship, so that they trust me as the filter, and like trust, like, and even for us to be able to know enough about each other that we can share this information back and forth. So I really appreciate that. I feel like as a mom, I definitely caught up in the details versus like, what's the overall goal? Like, even when I'm shielding, like, what's the goal in that, you know?
You bet. Yeah. And there's a paradigm that I work with. I often talk about when the difference in the balance between protection and preparation. So early on, we're really high on protection, right? But over the years, the preparation really needs to ramp up as protection decreases, because we're preparing our children to be responsible adults in this world, right? And that's really hard when we love these little ones, right? And again, those are such personal decisions, but certainly being mindful as a parent that I'm moving toward preparation as their years increase. So, yeah, and a lot of that is relational, right? Much more than it is about the details of what's going on in the world. As long as they really know that mom, dad love me, and that's a safe place for me to go, man, does that cover over a lot of, a lot of difficulties. So a lot of that is a relationship.
That's awesome. I love that little nugget, that the paradigm of preparation and protection. That was super cool. I haven't heard that idea of like that shift, but you're absolutely, I mean, like, it's like I'm subconsciously, I kind of know that, but even just putting that into words was really cool. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Paul. I really appreciate just your heart for like wanting to just understand more, wanting to share, like, and as soon as you find something like a nugget, if you want to share it, that's been super enjoyable just getting to hear from you. And thank you everyone for tuning in today, for viewing this, and for sharing your heart with us. We always really appreciate that. Definitely don't forget to submit your questions to MyCounselor.Online/ask. We love hearing from you, love knowing even what topics you want to learn about and how we can help you. That's what our hearts are here for. And if you aren't following us on social media, just so you can keep up to date with all of our newest videos and tidbits, definitely go to Facebook and find us when you search in Love My Counselor. On Instagram, our handle is the same thing, @LoveMyCounselor. And on YouTube, you can search MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. We'll see you next week for another episode of My Counselor Live. Have a great week, everyone.